What holds a civilization together? Is it emperors on golden thrones, armies of terracotta soldiers? Or is it something deeper, a thread of ink and paper, connecting 5,000 years of human ambition? Welcome to the Whispering Tome Country series. One nation, one story, told from beginning to end. We don't do shortcuts, we don't do summaries. We do history, raw, complete, and unforgettable. Our second chapter takes us beyond the Great Wall, the Middle Kingdom, the Celestial Empire, the center of the world. This is China. In the heart of East Asia lies a civilization so ancient, so vast, and so influential that it calls itself the Middle Kingdom, the center of the world. This is China, a land where emperors ruled with the mandate of heaven, where philosophers shaped the minds of billions, and where inventions from paper to gunpowder changed the course of human history. For 5,000 years, dynasties have risen and fallen like the tides of the Yellow River, each leaving its mark on a culture that has never truly broken with its past. From the mythical Yellow Emperor to the technological superpower of the 21st century, China's story is one of remarkable continuity and dramatic transformation. It is a story of brutal conquests and peaceful philosophies, of isolation and global influence, of emperors who believed themselves sons of heaven, and revolutionaries who sought to tear down every tradition. This is the history of China. Every great civilization begins with myth, and China is no exception. According to ancient tradition, Chinese civilization was founded by the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors, semi-divine beings who taught humanity the arts of civilization. The Yellow Emperor Huangdi is revered as the ancestor of all Han Chinese people, credited with inventing writing, medicine, and the compass. Whether these figures were real people transformed by legend or pure mythology, they reveal what the Chinese have always valued: wisdom, order, and the mastery of nature. The first dynasty that we can verify through archaeological evidence is the Shang dynasty, traditionally dated from around 2070 to 1600 BCE. For centuries, scholars debated whether the Shang ever existed outside of legend, until excavations at Erlitou revealed a sophisticated Bronze Age culture that may indeed represent this shadowy first dynasty. But it is the Shang dynasty, ruling from approximately 1600 to 1046 BCE, that provides us with China's first written records. The Shang left behind oracle bones, turtle shells, and animal bones inscribed with questions to the ancestors and gods. These inscriptions, the earliest form of Chinese writing, asked about harvests, warfare, and the will of heaven. Remarkably, the script on these 3,000-year-old bones is directly ancestral to the Chinese characters used by over 1 billion people today. The Shang were master bronze workers, creating ritual vessels of extraordinary beauty and complexity. They built elaborate tombs for their kings and, disturbingly, practiced human sacrifice on a massive scale, burying servants, soldiers, and prisoners to accompany rulers into the afterlife. The Shang capital at Yin, near modern Anyang, was a city of palaces, temples, and workshops that represented the first great urban center of Chinese civilization. Around 146 BCE, the Shang fell to the Zhou, a western frontier people who would establish China's longest-lasting dynasty. The Zhou justified their conquest through a concept that would shape Chinese political thought for millennia: the mandate of heaven. According to this doctrine, heaven grants the right to rule to virtuous kings and withdraws it from the corrupt and tyrannical. The fall of a dynasty is therefore not merely a political event, but a cosmic judgment, proof that the old rulers had lost heaven's favor. The Zhou dynasty's power gradually weakened, and by 770 BCE, after barbarian invasions forced them to move their capital eastward, real power had fragmented among dozens of competing states. This era, known as the Spring and Autumn period followed by the Warring States period, was one of constant warfare and political chaos. Yet paradoxically, it was also China's greatest age of philosophical creativity. Into this world of competing states and uncertain futures came thinkers who would shape East Asian civilization for millennia. Confucius, born around 551 BCE in the state of Lu, was a teacher who wandered from court to court, seeking a ruler who would implement his vision of a harmonious society. He never found one, yet his teachings, collected by his disciples in the Analects, would become the foundation of Chinese education, government, and social ethics. Confucius taught that society should be organized through proper relationships between ruler and subject, parent and child, husband and wife, elder and younger sibling, and friend and friend. Each relationship carried specific duties and obligations. If everyone performed their role correctly, harmony would naturally result. Education, ritual propriety, and moral self-cultivation were the paths to becoming a junzi, a superior person worthy of governing others. While Confucius focused on social harmony, another thinker offered a radically different vision. Laozi, whose historical existence is debated, is credited with founding Taoism and authoring the mysterious Tao Te Ching. Where Confucius emphasized active engagement with society, Laozi taught Wu Wei, non-action, going with the flow of nature rather than against it. The Tao that can be spoken is not the true Tao, the text famously begins, pointing toward a reality beyond words and concepts. Other schools emerged to address the chaos of the age. The Mohists, followers of Mozi, preached universal love and opposed offensive warfare. The legalists argued that human nature was inherently selfish and that only strict laws and harsh punishments could maintain order. This diversity of thought, known as the Hundred Schools of Thought, represented an intellectual flowering comparable to classical Greece and occurring at almost exactly the same time. By the late Warring States period, the state of Qin had emerged as the most powerful of the contenders. Located in the strategically defensible Wei River Valley, Qin had embraced legalist reforms that created the most efficient military and administrative machine of the era. In 230 BCE, Qin began its final campaign of conquest, and within just 9 years, it had swallowed every rival state. In 221 BCE, the king of Qin did something unprecedented. He declared that the old title of king was insufficient for one who had accomplished what no ruler before had achieved. He took a new title, Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of Qin. And, with that declaration, the Chinese Empire was born. The first emperor moved quickly to create a unified state from the conquered kingdoms. He standardized weights and measures, currency, and even the axle width of carts so that vehicles could use the same roads throughout the empire. Most importantly, he standardized the writing system, ensuring that officials from different regions could communicate despite speaking mutually unintelligible dialects. This standardized script is the direct ancestor of Chinese writing today. The first emperor connected existing defensive walls along the northern frontier into a continuous barrier against nomadic raiders. This early Great Wall, built with conscript labor at enormous human cost, was the ancestor of the famous stone walls we see today. He also ordered the construction of a massive road network and a tomb complex that would not be completed in his lifetime. But the first emperor's reign also had a darker side. In 213 BCE, he ordered the burning of books, philosophical texts, poetry, and histories that might encourage people to compare his rule unfavorably with the past. Hundreds of scholars who resisted were reportedly executed, buried alive in some accounts. The Qin dynasty believed in order through terror. The first emperor was obsessed with immortality, sending expeditions to find the elixir of eternal life. Ironically, he likely died from mercury poisoning, caused by the very potions his alchemists prepared to grant him immortality. He was buried in a tomb complex of staggering ambition, guarded by an army of terracotta soldiers, over 8,000 life-sized warriors, each with unique features discovered by farmers in 1974. Within 4 years of the first emperor's death in 210 BCE, his dynasty had collapsed. Peasant rebellions, sparked by the regime's brutal demands, engulfed the empire. The Qin had unified China, but their methods ensured they would not enjoy it for long. From the chaos of the Qin collapse emerged Liu Bang, a former village headman of humble origins who defeated his rivals and founded the Han Dynasty in 2002 BCE. The Han would rule China, with one interruption, for over 400 years, a span that gave the dominant ethnic group of China its name. To this day, ethnic Chinese call themselves Han people, and the Chinese script is called Han characters. The early Han emperors learned from the Qin's mistakes. They reduced taxes, softened punishments, and allowed Confucian scholars back into government. Under Emperor Wu, who reigned from 41 to 87 BCE, Confucianism was declared the official state ideology. A civil service examination system began to take shape, the revolutionary idea that government officials should be selected based on merit and education rather than birth. Emperor Wu was also a warrior. He launched massive campaigns against the Xiongnu, the nomadic confederation that had long threatened China's northern frontier. His armies pushed deep into Central Asia, making contact with distant peoples and establishing the trade routes that would later be called the Silk Road. The Silk Road connected China to Rome, although merchants rarely traveled the entire route themselves. Chinese silk, prized throughout the ancient world, flowed westward, while glassware, precious metals, and new ideas flowed east. Buddhism, which would transform Chinese culture, first arrived along these trade routes during the Han Dynasty. Han China was a land of innovation. Paper was invented during this dynasty, replacing expensive silk and cumbersome bamboo strips as a writing surface. The seismograph, the wheelbarrow, and advances in iron and steel technology all emerged from Han workshops and mines. Historian Sima Qian wrote his monumental records of the Grand Historian, establishing the template for Chinese historical writing for the next 2,000 years. The Han dynasty suffered a brief interruption when the reformer Wang Meng seized the throne in 9 CE, establishing his short-lived Qin dynasty. His radical reforms, including land redistribution and currency experiments, led to economic chaos and rebellion. The Han was restored in 25 CE with a new capital at Luoyang, the Eastern Han. By the late 2nd century CE, the Han dynasty was dying. Corrupt eunuchs dominated the court. Peasant rebellions broke out across the empire, and regional warlords accumulated power at the expense of the central government. The Yellow Turban Rebellion of 84 CE shook the empire to its foundations. In 2000 CE, the last Han emperor abdicated, and China splintered into 3 rival kingdoms. The fall of the Han ushered in nearly 4 centuries of division, warfare, and transformation. First came the Three Kingdoms period, Wei, Shu, and Wu, immortalized in one of China's greatest novels and countless films and video games. The heroes and villains of this era, Cao Cao, Liu Bei, Zhuge Liang, Guan Yu, remain household names in China today. Brief reunification under the Jin dynasty gave way to even greater chaos when nomadic peoples from the northern steppes invaded and conquered northern China. The period from 304 to 439 CE, known as the 16 Kingdoms, saw northern China ruled by a succession of non-Chinese dynasties. Chinese civilization might have been extinguished entirely, as Rome was falling in the west at almost exactly the same time. Instead, Chinese civilization absorbed its conquerors. The Northern Wei dynasty, founded by the Shanbei people, deliberately adopted Chinese culture, language, and institutions. Meanwhile, southern China remained under Chinese dynasties, preserving classical traditions while developing distinctive regional cultures. This era of division was also the Great Age of Buddhism in China. The religion, offering salvation in a time of suffering, spread rapidly among both commoners and elites. Monasteries accumulated wealth and influence, and cave temples filled with magnificent Buddhist art were carved into cliffsides at Dunhuang, Yungang, and Longmen. Reunification finally came in 589 CE, when the Sui dynasty conquered the last southern kingdom. The Sui emperors were ambitious builders. They constructed the Grand Canal linking North and South China, and they rebuilt the Great Wall. But their overreach, including disastrous invasions of Korea, exhausted the empire. Like the Qin before them, the Sui unified China only to collapse after 2 reigns. In 618 CE, a general named Li Yuan seized power from the collapsing Sui and founded the Tang Dynasty. His son, known to history as Emperor Taizong, would transform the Tang into perhaps the greatest dynasty in Chinese history. The Tang era represents China at its most cosmopolitan, confident, and culturally brilliant. The Tang capital at Chang'an was the largest city in the world, home to perhaps 1 million people within its walls. Foreign merchants, diplomats, and monks thronged its streets, bringing goods, ideas, and religions from across Asia. Zoroastrian temples, Christian churches, and Islamic mosques existed alongside Buddhist monasteries and Taoist shrines. Tang poetry reached heights never surpassed. Li Bai, the romantic drunkard who wrote of moonlight and wine, and Du Fu, the sober Confucian who chronicled war and suffering, are considered China's two greatest poets. Every educated Chinese person today can recite their verses. The Tang also saw China's only female emperor. Wu Zetian rose from concubine to empress consort, to empress dowager, to, finally, emperor in her own right, declaring her own Zhou dynasty and ruling from 690 to 705 CE. Ruthless, intelligent, and effective, she remains one of the most controversial figures in Chinese history. The Tang's golden age ended with the devastating Anlushan Rebellion of 755-763 CE. This civil war, led by a general of mixed Sogdian and Turkic ancestry, killed tens of millions. Some historians estimate the Tang lost 2/3 of its registered population. The dynasty survived another century and a half, but never recovered its former glory. In 907 CE, the Tang finally fell, and China once again fragmented. After 50 years of division, known as the Five Dynasties and 10 Kingdoms, a general named Zhao Kuangyin united most of China and founded the Song dynasty in 960 CE. The Song represents one of history's most fascinating paradoxes, a dynasty that was militarily weak, but economically and technologically revolutionary. The Song deliberately weakened the military to prevent the rebellions that had destroyed previous dynasties. Scholar officials, selected through rigorous civil service examinations, dominated government. This strategy prevented internal coups, but left the dynasty vulnerable to external enemies. But what the Song lacked in military power, they made up for in innovation. Movable type printing was invented centuries before Gutenberg. The compass was refined for maritime navigation, enabling long-distance sea voyages. Gunpowder, originally used for fireworks, was weaponized into bombs, rockets, and primitive firearms. Paper money, first used on a large scale, facilitated the commercial revolution. Cities grew enormous. Kaifeng and later Hangzhou may have had over 1 million inhabitants. International trade flourished, with Chinese ships sailing to Southeast Asia, India, and Africa. Some historians believe the Song experienced a genuine commercial revolution that brought China to the threshold of industrialization. The Song's military weakness proved fatal. In 1127, the Jurchen people from Manchuria conquered northern China, capturing the Song emperor and his court. The surviving Song court fled south, establishing the southern Song with a new capital at Hangzhou. For over a century, China was divided between the Jurchen Jin dynasty in the north and the southern Song in the south. Even the wealthy southern Song could not resist the storm that came from the steppes. The Mongols were coming. In 1206, a tribal leader named Temujin united the warring Mongol tribes and took the title Genghis Khan, universal ruler. Within decades, the Mongols had conquered the largest contiguous land empire in history, from Korea to Poland. China, the ultimate prize, would take 3 generations of Khans to fully subdue. Genghis himself conquered the Jurchen Jin dynasty of northern China, though he died before seeing its final destruction. His grandson, Kublai Khan, finished the conquest of southern China in 1279, ending the Song dynasty forever. For the first time in history, all of China was under foreign rule. Kublai Khan established the Yuan dynasty, ruling from a new capital at Dadu, modern Beijing. The Mongols maintained their distinctiveness, placing themselves at the top of a 4-tier ethnic hierarchy with native Chinese at the bottom. Yet Kublai was also drawn to Chinese culture, employing Chinese advisors and patronizing Chinese arts. The Yuan era saw increased contact between China and the West. Marco Polo, if his account is to be believed, spent 17 years in Kublai's service and brought back tales of Chinese wonders to an astonished Europe. The Pax Mongolica allowed trade, ideas, and unfortunately diseases to flow across Eurasia. but Mongol rule grew increasingly unstable. The Black Death, which devastated Europe, also ravaged China and weakened the Yuan. Floods, famines, and hyperinflation sparked peasant rebellions. In 1368, a peasant-turned-rebel leader named Zheng captured Beijing and drove the Mongols back to the steppes. China was Chinese again. Zheng founded the Ming Dynasty and took the reign name Hongwu. From beggar to Buddhist monk to rebel leader to emperor, his rise was one of history's most dramatic. Deeply suspicious and increasingly paranoid, he executed thousands of officials and created one of China's most autocratic governments. The Ming rebuilt China after Mongol rule, restoring Chinese customs and Confucian governance. A massive reconstruction program repaired the Grand Canal and built the Forbidden City in Beijing, the vast imperial palace complex that would house Chinese emperors for 5 centuries. The Great Wall was rebuilt in stone, taking the form we recognize today. The early Ming was an age of exploration. Between 1405 and 1433, the Admiral Zheng He led 7 massive naval expeditions across the Indian Ocean. His treasure fleet, hundreds of ships, some reportedly over 100 meters long, visited Southeast Asia, India, Arabia, and East Africa. These voyages demonstrated Chinese naval supremacy decades before European explorers rounded the Cape of Good Hope. And then, inexplicably, it stopped. The court abandoned maritime exploration, destroyed many of the great ships, and turned inward. China, which might have colonized the world, instead retreated behind its walls. The reasons remain debated: cost, Confucian prejudice against merchants, bureaucratic politics, but the consequences were profound. The Ming eventually closed China to most foreign contact, limiting trade to a few strictly controlled ports. European traders, missionaries, and adventurers began arriving in the 16th century. The Portuguese established themselves at Macau, while Jesuits like Matteo Ricci amazed the court with European clocks and maps. But China, confident in its superiority, saw little need to learn from barbarians. By the early 17th century, the Ming dynasty was crumbling. Corruption, factionalism, natural disasters, and peasant rebellions weakened the state. In 1644, a rebel army captured Beijing, and the last Ming emperor hanged himself on Coal Hill behind the Forbidden City. But it was not the rebels who had claimed China. The Manchus, descendants of the Jurchens who had conquered the Song, saw opportunity in Ming collapse. Invited through the Great Wall by a Ming general seeking help against the rebels, the Manchu armies never left. They established the Qing dynasty, the last imperial dynasty of China. The Manchus forced Chinese men to adopt their hairstyle, the queue, with shaved forehead and long braided tail. Resistance meant death. Yet despite their alien origins, the Qing would prove remarkably successful rulers. Under 3 remarkable emperors, Kangxi, Yongzheng, and Qianlong, the Qing presided over perhaps the greatest era of Chinese prosperity and power. The empire expanded to its greatest extent, incorporating Tibet, Mongolia, Xinjiang, and Taiwan. The population exploded from roughly 150 million to over 400 million by 1800. China was the world's largest economy, producing a third of global GDP. But storm clouds gathered in the 19th century. European powers, industrializing rapidly, demanded trade access to China. When Chinese officials destroyed British opium shipments in 1839, Britain launched the First Opium War. China's defeat shocked the empire. Western technology had surpassed the Middle Kingdom. The Treaty of Nanjing forced China to cede Hong Kong, open treaty ports, and grant extraterritoriality to foreigners. It was the first of the unequal treaties that would carve away Chinese sovereignty for a century. A second Opium War, the Arrow War of 1856 to 1860, brought further humiliations, including the burning of the Summer Palace by Anglo-French troops. Domestically, the Qing faced the catastrophic Taiping Rebellion of 1850-1864, led by a failed examination candidate who believed himself the brother of Jesus Christ. The Taiping Heavenly Kingdom controlled much of southern China and may have caused 20 million deaths. The Qing suppressed the rebellion, but only with help from regional armies that weakened central authority. The late Qing saw desperate attempts at reform. The self-strengthening movement tried to adopt Western technology while preserving Chinese culture. But military defeats continued. To France in 1885, to Japan in 1895. The Hundred Days' Reform of 1898, an attempt at radical modernization, was crushed by the Empress Dowager Cixi. The Boxer Rebellion of 1900, a peasant movement targeting foreigners and Chinese Christians, ended with an eight-nation army occupying Beijing. The humiliation was complete. By 1911, revolutionaries led by Sun Yat-sen organized uprisings across the country. On February 12, 1912, the last emperor, 6-year-old Puyi, abdicated. The Chinese Empire, which had endured for over 2,000 years, was no more. The Republic of China, proclaimed with Sun Yat-sen as provisional president, quickly descended into chaos. Power fell to Yuan Shikai, a former Qing general who briefly tried to make himself emperor before dying in 1916. The warlord era followed. Regional military strongmen fought for control, while the nominal government in Beijing was powerless. Two revolutionary parties emerged to compete for China's future. The Nationalist Party, Kuomintang, reorganized by Sun Yat-sen with Soviet help, aimed to unify China under a modernizing authoritarian government. The Chinese Communist Party, founded in 1921 with Mao Zedong among its early members, sought Marxist revolution. Initially allies against the warlords, they would soon become mortal enemies. After Sun Yat-sen's death in 1925, Chiang Kai-shek emerged as the nationalist leader. In 1927, he launched a bloody purge of communists in Shanghai, beginning a civil war that would last, with interruptions, for over 20 years. The nationalists established their capital at Nanjing and achieved nominal unification of China. The communists, nearly destroyed, retreated to the countryside. Mao Zedong developed a strategy of peasant revolution, building support among rural populations rather than urban workers, as orthodox Marxism prescribed. The Long March of 1934 and 1935, a desperate 6,000-mile retreat from nationalist encirclement, killed most of the communist forces, but forged the survivors into hardened revolutionaries and established Mao as leader. The Japanese invasion of 1937 forced the Civil War into temporary suspension. The Second Sino-Japanese War was catastrophic. The rape of Nanjing alone killed perhaps 300,000 civilians. China suffered more casualties than any nation except the Soviet Union during World War II. After Japan's defeat in 1945, the Chinese Civil War resumed. The Communists, having built support in the countryside during the war against Japan, steadily defeated the nationalist forces. On October 1, 1949, Mao Zedong stood at Tiananmen Gate and proclaimed the founding of the People's Republic of China. The nationalists fled to Taiwan, where they would maintain the Republic of China to this day. Mao's China began with idealism and ended in catastrophe. Land reform gave peasants their own fields for the first time, but also resulted in the execution of perhaps 2 million landlords. The Korean War established China as a power willing to confront the United States. The Great Leap Forward of 1958-1962 was intended to rapidly industrialize China through collectivization and mass mobilization. Instead, it produced the deadliest famine in human history. Between 15 and 55 million people starved to death. The true number remains debated and politically sensitive. The Cultural Revolution of 1966-1976 was Mao's attempt to reassert his authority and destroy his enemies. Red Guards, young people mobilized by Maoist ideology, attacked teachers, intellectuals, and anyone deemed insufficiently revolutionary. Temples were destroyed, books burned, traditions erased. Perhaps another million died, and an entire generation lost their education. Mao died in 1976, and within 2 years, a new leader had emerged. Deng Xiaoping, twice purged during the Cultural Revolution, began the reform and opening up that would transform China. His pragmatic philosophy: it doesn't matter if a cat is black or white, as long as it catches mice. Special economic zones opened China to foreign investment. Private enterprise was permitted, then encouraged. Farmers were allowed to sell surplus crops at market prices. The result was the most dramatic economic transformation in human history. Political reform did not follow economic reform. The Tiananmen Square protests of 1989, when students and workers demanded democratic changes, ended with military suppression. The Communist Party would maintain its monopoly on power while delivering economic growth. In the decades since, China has risen to become the world's second-largest economy. Hundreds of millions have been lifted out of poverty. High-speed rail networks, gleaming cities, and technological advances have transformed daily life. China has returned, in many ways, to its historical position as a great power. But challenges remain. An aging population, environmental degradation, tensions over Taiwan and Hong Kong, and questions about political freedom continue to shape China's future. The balance between economic dynamism and political control remains China's central challenge as it enters its sixth millennium of civilization. We began this journey with the Yellow Emperor, the mythical founder whose legend still resonates with over 1 billion people. We have traveled through Bronze Age oracle bones and Iron Age philosophers, through unified empires and fragmented kingdoms. We have witnessed foreign conquests absorbed and Chinese culture persisting, dynasties rising with the mandate of heaven and falling when that mandate was lost. What explains China's remarkable continuity? Perhaps the writing system, which unified a land of many dialects. Perhaps the examination system, which created a shared elite culture across regions and centuries. Perhaps the idea of China itself, the conviction that there is a proper order to civilization and that China is its guardian. Today, China stands at another crossroads. Will it become a democracy or remain under one-party rule? Will it challenge America for global supremacy or seek accommodation? Will its ancient civilization find new forms of expression or be overwhelmed by modernity? These questions will be answered by the Chinese people themselves, drawing on 5,000 years of history to navigate an uncertain future. The story of China is not merely past. It is being written today by 1.4 billion people in characters their ancestors would recognize, and it will continue for millennia to come. This has been a Whispering Tome documentary.